Can you hear me okay? There's like a beer fridge back here that's making rather appealing noises. Can you hear me in the back?
Yep.
He's nodding and they're nodding off. Okay, dynamite. I'm going to talk about agility and Agile and what I think we meant by Agile tonight. I'll just preface it by saying it's a little embarrassing to still be talking about this 10 years later. On the one hand, there's not a thing in these slides that is newer than 10 years, really. It's the same old stuff. You'd think this would be old hat by now, and yet every time I say the same old stuff, half the audience comes up afterwards and is like, which is a little frightening. It's a little scary. So I'm going to talk about some stuff about how we got there, some things we might have forgotten or misplaced along the way, and some other things that come up as they cross my fevered imagination. So I want to start off with just kind of a background about programming in general, and the fact that there's actually only 3 classically hard problems in computer science, only the 3. And that's hash invalidation and off by 1 errors. You got to pay attention or you're not going to get the joke. But the thing is, the real problems we face actually have nothing to do with the technology. It has nothing to do with the programming language. I know that's heresy at a room meeting, but I was playing with Scheme yesterday, I have to admit it. It has nothing to do with the technology. It's all people problems at the end of the day. That's what we run into. And specifically, talking about agility, is this idea of adaptability. In fact, a lot of times I wonder, when we sat around and picked the name Agile, that might not have been the best choice. Maybe we should have called it adaptable programming, or surviving programming, or something more along those lines. And if you go back, I mean, Kent's first book on XP Explained, right? What was the subtitle?
Embrace change.
Embrace change, right? He didn't say, grit your teeth and put up with change, which is what we do, right? Right? No, embrace change. Grab it, own it, write it, harness it. Who can honestly say they do that? Okay, no one's taking that bait. All right. So I want to look at that a little bit. Now, some of the stuff that I want to talk about, especially as background, comes from my Thinking and Learning book, which that's sort of the outline for it there. And invariably somebody in the back tries to scribble all that down. I'll save you the trouble. If you go to that there URL, you can download that mind map. And that kind of covers all the topics I thought was interesting in the realm of thinking and learning, which, as it turns out, has a lot to do with what we do as software developers, and it plays right into the idea of agility. So a couple topics from that book that I just want to kind of lay as groundwork, one of which is the idea of the absolute importance of context. And what do I mean by that? Well, if I asked you to think of a tree, or to draw a tree, you'd probably conjure up something sort of like this. This is why I don't make a living as an artist. That's what you think of as a tree, right? You know, the sort of 4th grade drawing, here's a tree sitting on the ground. It's a discrete object. It is a thing. You've objectified it. You've taken it out of context. You are guilty of decontextualized objectivity, if you will. That is not a tree. It's not even a good representation of a tree. A tree is a bunch of interreacting systems. And this is one of the key lessons from systems thinking. From systems thinking that Peter Senge popularized in the 5th discipline, the idea that nothing really stands alone as an object, much as we'd like it to. It's all a bunch of interreacting systems. You know, the tree has got all this respiration going on with the leaves and the Krebs cycle and all this stuff with the roots and the chemicals, and then you've got the life cycle of the tree. It dies, it returns to the forest, it nourishes the saplings, it's the circle of life. Kumbaya, the whole thing. It's doing its whole business, and you don't get that from this. That's taken out of context. So, again and again, I'll harp to the idea that, you know, to really look at something or understand something, you have to appreciate the context it's in. That's true for how the notion of agility came to be. It's true on your team. You talk about, should we use this piece of technology, or should we hire this person, or should we do this practice? The answer is always, well, what's the context? What's everything else around it? If someone on your team is having a bad day, the code's going to have a bad day. The team's going to have a bad day. You're going to have a bad day. It's all interrelated. Because of that, when you take things out of context, you can get the wrong idea about them. For instance, if you're in the dentist or doctor's office, or even the bank, and there's a sign that says free candy, that's probably legitimate. On the other hand, if you see it spray painted on a van, maybe not so much. That lacks a certain, credibility, something, right? And Axe is a great tool, great woodworking tool, but you probably don't want to go hitchhiking with one. You could be sending the wrong message, maybe, something like that. And a slightly more serious case, do you hear the story of this violinist named Joshua Bell? A couple of years ago, he participated in this experiment in Washington, D.C. He's a world-class violinist, right? He plays Carnegie Hall, a couple $100 a seat, kind of ticket prices. He plays on a $3.5 million Stradivarius, right? I mean, this guy is serious. So he participated in this experiment where he played on the Washington, D.C. subway 45 minutes during rush hour. Something like 15 to 20,000 people filed past him while he's sitting there playing on his $3.5 million violin. And he had his hat out. 7 folks chipped in $30. Context. Here's some crank in the subway. How can you tell that this is actually a world-class violinist playing on a Stradivarius? Right? The context just kind of disguises it. So sometimes appreciating something is just looking at it from a different way, different point of view, right? The solar system model. How many of you had to build one of these in school, right? There's all the planets and the nice concentric rings. It's a lovely model. It's not really what it looks like. There's this great animation here that suggests it's actually, if you think about what's spinning around where, it's really a vortex model. Because the sun's hurtling through space, we're hurtling around the sun, and if you model it as a vortex, you really get a different sense of what the solar system is like. On the one hand, this is way cool. Right? We're going somewhere. I don't know where exactly, but we're headed somewhere, right? We're not just sitting there looping around, coming all, it's like a video loop coming back to the same old spot each year. Nah, we are whipping through the cosmos. Same thing, just looking at it, from a slightly different point of view. So, context is important. Now, as I mentioned, back in 2001, it was February of 2001, the 17 of us, by luck and hope and whatever, managed to end up in this place in Snowbird, Utah. Mostly because Alistair wanted to go skiing there because he lives in Utah and he's a ski bum. So we all went there. I didn't ski. Who skis in North Carolina, right? Not a big thing. Yeah. So we're hanging there, 17 of us, and came up, you talk about herding cats, right? Here you've got, a couple really massive egos and a couple not so massive egos, and all trying to hammer out something that we could all more or less agree on. We didn't really agree on a whole lot, but, we kind of hammered this stuff out and launched this whole notion of an agile movement. Great. That was February 2001. September of 2001, of course, some other stuff happened, which was equally noteworthy. And you'd think, global events of that magnitude would just be seared into the global consciousness, right? And yet, on the day that Osama bin Laden was killed by the SEALs, one of the top trending tweets on Twitter was, who the hell is Osama bin Laden? 66% of tweets from tweens, boy, that's a tough one. Tweets from tweens were asking things like, who is Osama bin Laden? Is he in a band? Explain this to me. I feel retarded for asking this. Who is Osama? Is he famous? Am I the only one who don't know who he is? Grammar notwithstanding. And that was 9, 10 years after the event, a couple years back, right? So in just 10 years, look at the things you can forget, right? So that's kind of my thrust here. Is like, okay, well, let's go back and look at those early days and pick up and see what did we leave behind, maybe that we should know. If you go to agilemanifesto.org, there's this wonderful washed out picture where you can see the back of my head. And you can see Dave Thomas's face right there. That's Uncle Bob. There's Martin Fowler. Ron Jeffries is over here. I can't really see, the rest are kind of faded. But that's kind of, back of my head, proof we were there. And this was fun. This was on the, the TV set in the room. Or as my son says, well, it looks like a TV set, but Dad, what's all that stuff hanging off the back? CRT tubes, right? And it was the lightweight methods conference. That's how we booked it at the hotel, because we hadn't come up with the name Agile yet. We had lightweight, which to everyone kind of sounded like some guy in tights. It was kind of like, just, ballet connotations. It didn't quite serve. So one of the orders of business was try to come up with a better name. But even with all that, none of the stuff that we talked about was really particularly new. Right? Even controversial ideas like pair programming, that has a long distinguished history. Clearly, that's been around for a long time. But when the 10-year anniversary of this came up, I went and looked through my little notebook that I had at the time, and I thought it was kind of interesting looking through the notes that I took of what we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about particular practices really at all. There was no long, drawn-out discussion of pair programming or various ways of doing estimation or refactoring or any of that kind of stuff. And maybe there should have been. At the time, even practices like using version control weren't widely accepted. There was a survey at the time that said, I forget the figure offhand, but it was close to half. It was like 40% maybe of shops did not use any version control at all. They had a shared disk and last one in wins. A little terrifying. And yet, even with that, we didn't talk about practices. So, what did we talk about? 38%. Yeah, it's down to 38%. Yeah, progress. Woo. And they're using Git with a subversion front end. Anyway, so one of my favorite trick questions is to say, raise your hand if you're doing Agile. Ooh, that's really clever. At conference, all the hands go up. I'm like, wrong! Agile is something you are. It's not something you do. And they go, wow. So what were we thinking? At the time, Agile itself wasn't something that we didn't even make a definition for, right? There was no canonical, this is Agile. There was the manifesto, but there wasn't a definition per se. And there really shouldn't have been. We wanted something that was supposed to be ever-shifting, ever-changing, ever-responding to change, right? That was kind of the point. But despite that, people want to hang their hat on something. So when I wrote one of these books with my friend Benefit Supermanium, I came up with a definition of Agile since no one else had. It's like, all right, fine. I'll put a stake in the ground. Try this on for size. Agile development uses feedback to make constant adjustments in a highly collaborative environment. Straightforward. Palm and apple pie, right? Nothing to argue with there. Smart people let them do their best. And of course, at the time, what we were trying to avoid was the prevalent notion back then, and still stunningly prevalent today, that you have to have kind of heroic acts. You start off with the big plan, and have a mighty act, and then a lengthy wait, and then inevitably the sad third act, and whatever happens off the end there. And that's what we really were trying to get away from. Now, the unfortunate thing is, this is how we're wired. Somewhere deep in your DNA, it says this is the way you should do things. This is the way you should do proper business. This is the way you should do real, manual software development, and this kind of thing. And so we're trying to say, no, do something. Get real-time, real-world feedback on that activity. Correct what you need to. Do it again. Notice the first step is do. It's not planned, it's not figured out, it's not anything else. It's, well, okay, we don't know what we're doing. Fine, do something. And get feedback on it. And go from there. Now that's fine to say. This is one of those great, easy, simple slides that's maybe harder to do in practice. So there's a couple keys to this, right? We tell people, focus on doing continuous development, not episodic. In other words, don't have any portion of what you're doing in software development that is a big, hairy deal. No big, high ceremony event. No big episode. You don't have a big testing episode. It sounds like a medical condition, doesn't it? It's horrible. But you want continuous, a little bit of everything all the time. You want feedback loops in everything you do with a short feedback gap. So when you do something, you want to know pretty quick, is it working? Is it not working? Is it going to fail? Is it what anybody wants other than me? Is it even doing what I thought the code should be doing? All that kind of feedback all the time, and it's not just about coding, right? In coding, this is well-covered territory. You have unit tests, you have test-driven development. You want multiple eyes on code, whether it's pairing or code reviews or whatever. These are all great ways of getting feedback. You're curious about design? Will this design work? Try it. Try a couple of them. There was a great talk a couple years ago by Richard Gabriel, who was, I forget his title at the time, it was like Chief Grand Poobah at the Sun, back when there was a sun, before the age of darkness. And he had this whole spiel about the relative effort it took to get a PhD in computer science versus a master's in poetry. And the difference was stark. To get a PhD in computer science from Stanford, I think, someplace well-known, well-respected, right? He had to write like a computer program and read a couple of books. There wasn't a lot. The master's in poetry, he had to write a poem a day for 3 years. He had to write one poem, the same poem, 60 different ways. 60. Can you imagine how good a programmer you could be if you took some program of the week and rewrote it in 60 different ways? Different designs, different algorithms, different languages. Write it in Scheme, write it in Ruby, write it in Prolog, write it in I/O, write it in Clojure. Think what you could learn if you did something like that. Try it. Requirements. How do you get the feedback from that? Constant user involvement. That's why we preach the whole get the user plopped down in the room with you. The single most successful project in my 30-odd years of doing this had exactly that. We had the person who was going to use and work with all the other users on the system. We had her right there where we could ask questions. She was the only one who knew the answers. Manuals didn't cover it, the specs weren't quite right. She knew what was going on. That was by far the most successful project. Teamwork. How do you know if your team's working? Right? Stand-up meeting from Scrum. If I had to pick the sort of #1 practice that I see to help more teams than any other, it'd be the stand-up meeting, when done right. Because you're getting real-time feedback right then and there. So the key to the success of this whole thing is to make sure that you're in a position where you can get feedback. You've got to be able to seek it, but then you've got to do something about it. There's nothing more soul-sucking than identifying a problem and not being able to fix it. And this is why to even consider having an organization try doing an agile process of any sort, you have to have the ability to change anything that needs changing. And it's not just the design or the code, but it's the process you're using, if you have a process, the product you're building, the management, the users. That's all open. That's all for grabs. Some folks lose track of the site that you want this kind of system of nested cycles. You get kind of a rhythm going. Right? This is why I say, well, I don't really care what iteration length you have. Make more than 4 weeks. But pick a number and stick with it. Keep it constant. Keep this rhythm going. I got folks who say, oh, you don't really need check-in code multiple times a day, do you? I said, you're right. No, I misspoke. I meant multiple times per hour. And they kind of look at you and the drool starts. outside of the mountain. And they said, well, we can't do that because the server is located in Bangalore because that's where our offshore team is, and our times, the lag is so horrible, we only commit code once a week. This is what's out there. No, it's terrifying. Yeah, no. So you want to have this kind of nested thing going on. But the real important part is the mindset, the attitude behind agility. And I love this quote from Tom Peters, who was putting forth the phrase, ready, fire, aim, as a better way of doing things. And he found this quote from this book about Western aid into Africa. And the author says, you know, you've got planners and you've got searchers. You want to be a searcher. Searchers find things that work and build on them. Planners apply blueprints. Searchers adapt to local conditions, paying attention to context again. Searchers find out if the customer is satisfied. Planner thinks he already knows the answers. Right? That's a huge red flag for anything that comes up. If you think that you know the answer, that's dangerous. But more important, the searcher admits he doesn't know the answers in advance. He's hoping to find them. That's what makes him a searcher instead of a planner. That quote right there captures an awful lot about what I think we've been trying to get across. The other side of that is this great quote that I found from Dr. Patricia Benner when I was doing the research on the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition for the Thinking and Learning book. She wrote the book From Novice to Expert, talking about skill transfer in the nursing profession, but it translated to a lot of other professions based on research on airline pilots and chess players and all kinds of other fields. And she noted this difficulty talking about practices. You can never really write them down and formalize them. You can't say, this is the process we're going to follow and these are the practices we're going to do, because they have to be worked out anew and in particular relationships and in real time. In other words, in context. You can't just say, well, we're going to do whatever, pick a practice, because Kent said it in his book and we read another book on it, it's in this magazine article, therefore we have to do it. They ain't you. That's not your team, that's not your project, it's a different context. It might be a good starting point, and maybe it'll work great for you. But there's no guarantee about that. You have to work it out as you go along. That's something I think we've forgotten. I see a lot of places that say, well, we do these 4 practices or 3.5 and we are agile. No, you're doing a couple of practices, and they might be helpful to you. Brushing your teeth is helpful. I recommend it. It's a good thing. Eat your broccoli, but I don't think you're agile. So that's one of the things I think we've kind of lost along the way. Another set of things that I think maybe we've forgotten about is where the notions of agility came from, kind of what the roots of it were, the basis of it were. And quite a bit of it came from more or less real science. Pardon the real science graphic there. But things like chaos theory and Kaizen, systems thinking, a little risk management. One of the biggest ideas I think got lost was some stuff from Dee Hock, who was the founder of Visa International. Right? No small potatoes there. He took it from small potatoes to untold billions upon billions. And he liked this idea from chaos theory, and applying chaos theory to business practices, saying you really want to kind of teeter right on that edge. Too far this way, and it's chaos and anarchy, and nothing shifts. Too far that way, it's stagnation, and you rot and die. You need to balance on that edge, like right in between. And curiously, even though his career goes a good ways back, and he's a much older man now, you see folks like the president of Pixar. I think you've heard of Pixar, kind of a hot commodity out in Hollywood. Ed Catmull's a real agile kind of guy. He's got a couple of quotes I'm going to sprinkle in here, but he recognizes that you need this kind of inherent instability to drive things. Why would that be? Well, the other idea that got lost is the idea of emergence. Have you ever seen the Boyd's simulation or something like it? It's pretty cool. This is a computer simulation to simulate a flock of birds in motion. And what's cool is there's all kinds of neat properties they have here. You can see some of them in this animation. but they'll split around an obstacle and reform, and they do all these great sort of like wave-like patterns down around the ground and you know, all these kind of flowy things. There's a lot of really interesting behavior, none of which is programmed. These particles are governed by these 3 rules and only these 3 rules. Separation, alignment, and cohesion. You can do the same thing with boards of orcs, I'm told, if you're doing an animation system, right? It's particle animation, that's the whole game. But what happens here is you've got very simple rules, and out of that you get this kind of rich emergent behavior. And this is, you know, as far as I'm concerned, this is something akin to black magic or perpetual motion, right? You're getting something for nothing. You're getting order out of chaos with very little input, or at least disproportionate input, something very small. That's really what we want to see. We want to see that in code, we want to see that in teams. We want to see complex behavior from simple interactions. Now, I know for certain that the converse is true, that you get stupid behavior from complex interactions, right? Just look at the tax code. Take, you know, any portion of the IRS and look at what stupid behavior emerges from this insanely complex kind of setup. You could look at the 25 lineal shelf space that it takes to document J2EE. You draw your own conclusions. Here's monstrous complexity. What comes out the other end? But those are the bad things. We want simple interactions. We want to keep those simple to get powerful emergent behavior. And they're saying, okay, fine, you know, Andy, it's getting late here, and you know, blah blah blah, right? Except that this actually works. And I had an interesting opportunity last summer to see it firsthand. I was visiting a company who remained nameless out on the left coast. They had about 100 software developers at the time. They've got more than that now. The entire company is run by a 4-person team, simply because someone has to sign the checks. There are no managers. There are no directors. There are no team leads. There's no attendance statement. A lot of the company works remote. You want to work on something, you kind of sign up for it. It's a pull model. So I like this. This is interesting. I like to be on this little sub-team. And you start working on that. You have a cool idea. All right, that's dynamite. You need to convince someone else that it is cool enough for them to drop what they're working on and work on you with this. 2-person minimum. Bad ideas get called out pretty quickly. Everyone, whether it's a large team or a new idea that somebody's got an itch for, has to release working product early and often. Sound familiar? Right? We've been preaching that for a long time. And it works for them. That's their evaluation. You know, that nice line that goes like this. Clearly it's working for them. And it's not just them. I mean, I got a chance to see these particular folks up close and personal and verified, wow, yes, this actually does work. But I've personally heard of at least a half dozen, if not a dozen other companies quite similar that have been able to pull this sort of thing off. Simple interactions, complex behavior, which leads us to the idea that simplicity isn't a goal. It's not something you want to strive for. It's a tool. It's a generative tool. It lets you get richer, more interesting, complex behavior out. So that's a fun thought. Then there was the idea of taken from Japanese lean manufacturing-ish of Kaizen, continuous changes based on continuous feedback. That's very powerful. If you can, in fact, get continuous feedback and actually do something about it. And that can be more subtle than you think. We talk about that in the context of code, but the same thing happens when you go into a meeting. Right? Here's a big all-hands meeting schedule. First alert bell. It's a big event. It doesn't happen very often. It's a big episode. Ooh, something's wrong. Why are we doing this? Second warning point. What's the feedback? How do we know when the meeting's done? You know, is it when the boss's bladder fills up? Is it when the building closes? What's the trigger? How do we know when it's done? How do we get feedback? And what can we do with it? None, don't know. Bad idea. Something's wrong. Risk management. We have a lot of interesting ways to reduce risk. We can do some of them, which is kind of cool. Biggest thing I tell folks, take small bites. Right? right? You're not going to climb the mountain in one go. Take small steps, right? One of the best analogies somebody threw out was you're running through a cave in the dark with a small flashlight, right? First of all, stop running. You know, those chasms, those holes open up mighty quick when you're going along. Time box, there we go. Everything, meetings, development work, being stuck on a problem. What's your rule in the workplace for how long you can be stuck on a bug before you have to call for help? An hour? Half hour? A week? A month? Never? Right? It's really cool to like set and say, all right, if you or your pair, if you're stuck on a bug more than N amount of time, you have to go interrupt someone and ask for help. Get a fresh pair of eyes on it. Because you know what happens, right? As soon as you do that, somebody walks over and you start explaining, so we set this decision, oh crap, and it's fixed and they go back and life goes on. But that's an important thing. If you don't set that kind of limit up, you can sit there and while away a day, a couple days, a week. And this is where you get the degraded stand-up meeting where someone says, and what did you do yesterday? Well, we're still working on the database connection or whatever it is. And the next day rolls around, we're still working on the thing about that. Right? That's a really bad answer, by the way, in a stand-up meeting. You don't want to ever say, I'm still working on X. The whole point is to say, what did you achieve since last time? This works now. You know, I've checked this in, I've designed this works now. You can do this that you couldn't do before. What are you going to do? I'm going to make this other thing work. Maybe I don't actually finish that, but that's what I'm going to try to do. But it always has to be very concrete in terms of achievement, not just, well, I plan on working on X again. Get my paycheck, get some coffee. Transparency is a big thing we like to strive for. The stand-up meeting gives you general awareness of everyone's work, gives a chance to show progress early and often, just like those folks at that other company. You want real retrospectives, not postmortems. What's the inherent problem with a postmortem? The patient's dead. You really don't have a lot of opportunities for correction there. And there's a trick with this. You know, you can read the lectures and the material and say, okay, we want to do retrospectives at the end of each iteration. That's a reasonable place to do them, that's fine. So you get everyone together in the room and say, hey, how did we do? Everyone's like, fine, we cracked the beer now. Right? You don't necessarily get accurate answers. It's like if you're doing polling for Gallup or something and you want to do a study in alcoholism, right? And so the person answers the door, you say, hi, are you a drunk? Not really the best way to go about it. Because first of all, if you're on a college community, you're going to get a lot of false positives. Oh yeah, every night. You know. And if you're in a suburban community, you might get the, no, never. You know, never touch a drop. You're not going to get accurate answers. So for something like retrospectives, you need to be a little more clever about it. And there's books out there, we publish one of them, other people publish ones. They give you all these kinds of consultant tricks with dot votes and index cards and, you know, whatever, to try to mine useful information out of the team might not even be consciously aware of. So you're up against some hurdles there. You can't just say, all right, we did a retrospective. It's not quite that easy. Be a little more clever about it. But the big thing is, you don't want to leave places for bugs to hide. Whatever it is. And I personally don't care if you do pair programming, or if you do code reviews, or if you do something else that's similar, but you gotta have more than one pair of eyes on the code for transparency. So again, how you actually implement this stuff, what practice you use, what set of practices you use, I don't care. The Agile police aren't going to come after you and take your Agile license away or your certification, or whatever it might be. It doesn't matter, as long as you're adhering to the kind of things that we want to do, which we'll get to in a bit. And just a side note there, if you really want to avoid bugs, write less code. I hear an amen over here. Bless its heart, this is one of the good things about Ruby. You can write less code to get something done in general. So already you're limiting your scope for screwing something up as opposed to, say, C++ maybe. This is a way of the picture somebody who shot both his feet off and is hobbling one on stubs. Some other good stuff. One of the points I like about Scrum, when they talk about the stand-up meeting, is this idea that when you're going around answering the three questions, what did I do yesterday, what I'm working on now, what am I stuck on, what comes out of the what am I stuck on is the manager's to-do list. Because they've got the power to fix it. Their role is to remove obstacles for the team. If I had a nickel for every team to whom this was brand news, we'd be having this meeting as a team right now. That's a simple thing. Make clear the path for your team, right? But often not done. So now and again I think, okay, well, I just run into these crazy companies sometimes who just have the totally wrong idea about Agile, but you know, it's just me, right? The rest of the world isn't like that. Just last week, Dan North, I don't know if you know Dan, BDD guy, I follow him on Twitter, and he was apparently rather frustrated with some client that he was interacting with. So he put out a series of tweets about what the Agile Manifesto said versus what this team he was working with did, which I just thought was really interesting. So the first line of the Agile Manifesto says, people and interactions over processes and tools. Great. What's the thing the team talks about on the first day? Which process and tools shall we use? Sound familiar? A little guilt in the back there? Is that not an easy question to come up? Is that the right question to come up? Probably not. Working software over comprehensive documentation. And the Agile team on the second day says, which automated spec framework should we use? Our spec coulda, shoulda, woulda, didn't, whatever. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And on the third day, they said, how much shall we commit to in this sprint? Adapting to change over following a plan. And on the fourth day, they said, let us build a 200-story backlog and follow it. Yeah, I get some nervous laughter over here. Yeah, that ain't the idea. That's the wrong way around, which leads us to the conclusion that Agile cannot, in fact, fix stupid. And that is an actual warning sign. Which I thought was hilarious until somebody told me that one of these things said, but when you're sharpening it, you do have to hold the wrong end. You go first. Knock your socks off there. So there's actually science behind this. Capers-Jones put out this doorstop book back around the turn of the century on software benchmarks and best practices. And he had all these things about, well, what actually constitutes best practice? What helps, what doesn't help? Agile and XP weren't widely known or appreciated when he did this study, because he did this some years up to 2000. But he had a lot of folks involved. It was like 6,000 software projects, over 900 companies, everything from giant DoD stuff to small little shrink wrap vendors at the time, that kind of deal. And he gets into all these facts and figures, finds some things like at the time he discovered that UML was completely neutral. Didn't help, didn't hurt, didn't matter. A lot of stuff came up in that didn't matter category. And in fact, in the preface of his big research study book, he noted that if you ain't got good people, you is hosed, as they say down in these parts. You only achieve marginal results even if you have an excellent process. It's all about the people. And he actually quantified this. I've lost the numbers on this particular graph, but it was something on the realm of, I think, a 65% loss in productivity if you had underperforming staff, undereducated, underskilled staff. And more than that, he was like an 80 or 90% drop in productivity if you had a poorly skilled manager. So having bad folks on the team, having a bad manager, isn't just mildly painful, it is demonstrably, largely negative to the health of the team. So it all comes back to people. Like I said right out of the gate, it's all a people problem. So here's the hard part. As programmers, we tend to think that we're like this, that the race is like this, that we are logical, we are rational, we are contemplative, we know how to think through problems. And unfortunately, this is a flawed model of human reason. This is a slightly more accurate pictorial representation of what our brains do. It's a gibbering monkey in there. If you look at the Wikipedia page for cognitive biases, there are some 90 common cognitive biases that Wikipedia lists. I have surely met people who exceed that number individually. And the problem is, we're not really aware of these, but they affect agility, they affect agile adoption in particular. One of my favorites is the need for closure in this Dilbert cartoon. Dilbert says, I didn't have any accurate numbers, so I just made this one up. Studies have shown that accurate numbers aren't any more useful than the ones you make up. How many studies show that? 87. And Scott Adams yelled again. And this is why things like big design up front and estimates up front and all these sorts of activities are really appealing. They are some folks who have such a strong need for closure, and I'm sure you've met them, that's closure with an S, not a J. They absolutely, it's like, I don't care if you're lying to me. I don't care if you're giving me a completely false number, I need a number. There is a hole in the spreadsheet, and by the love of God, I have to put a number in there. So you say, fine, 42. They go away happy. They know it's wrong, but that need for closure has been met. And that is, it's like anything else. Some people suffer from this really strongly. Some people, that's okay. It's not a big deal. But for the folks where this is important, this is a big problem. Because they want it laid out up front, even knowing that that's complete fiction. And of course, we try to tell people, and have been telling them for a long time, you want uncertainty. You want to be comfortable with uncertainty, as awkward as that sounds. Because what happens, right? When do you know the least about a project? Right? The day the boss taps you on the shoulder, or the customer comes in, well, we're starting this thing. It doesn't even have a name yet. It's a thing. You got a customer who's got something. That's T0. You know the least about the project. When do you know the most about it? Once the check clears, right? Once it's delivered, once it's done, once it's out there in the world, you've birthed it, and that's like, we should have done it that way. We should have done it, whatever, the second it starts. So, when do you know the most about the project? At the end. When do you know the least? At the beginning. When do you want to make your big decisions? As late as possible. Thank you.
Sure. That's the trick of the balance. How do you avoid analysis paralysis? Well, we don't know. Let's keep studying.
Yeah, you generally don't want to you don't want to keep studying it. You say, how can we find out? Yeah, let's do a couple prototypes. We can do it this way or that way. All right, do a couple prototypes. Does that tell us what we need to know? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you want to architect your code in such a way that you don't have to make that decision now. Think lazy evaluation. Be like a closure compiler. Set it all up, but don't really run it yet. Wait till you actually need it, and then hopefully you're farther down the line away. And some stuff you can take a reasonably educated guess, and especially if you're in a position where this is a very similar project to the other 14 you've just done for other clients. Okay, you can make some pretty educated guesses, and you'll probably be pretty right. Not everyone is as fortunate as that, and a lot of times the project you've got now has nothing to do with the previous one, so you don't have much to go on. But absolutely, you want to defer decisions as much as possible. That's acutely uncomfortable for most of the population. Most of us, I think, probably just don't have that gene. Maybe we do. But I know a lot of people are just acutely uncomfortable with this. Some other things we fall into is something called the fundamental attribution error, where you tend to blame someone because it's them. Oh, he's like that because he's a Southerner. He's a Yankee, he's a redneck, he's a Democrat, he's a Republican, he's a whatever. When in fact, people's behavior is typically driven more from context than anything else. You seeing something bad on a team, it's not necessarily the person, it's not necessarily the team, it's the mix, it's the context. Change the context and you can change the behavior. We are terribly loss averse. We really don't want to do anything that stands the risk of losing something, especially if we've invested in it heavily, like, say, years and years of Java certifications, or some of the crazy things people do. Go figure. And there's this great story of the South Indian monkey trap. The way you can trap a monkey is you dig this hole in the ground, shaped kind of like that, with a big bottom and a tiny thing. You put bananas or other bait inside. Monkey goes in, grabs the bananas, can't get out because he's holding the bananas. All he's got to do is let go, and he's free. Guess what? You don't let go. And a lot of times, neither do we. And that can be anything. You know, you've got a big investment in Ruby on Rails. You've got a big investment in Oracle. You've got a big investment in whatever's hot today. Is that really the best tool for the thing you're working on right now? Maybe, maybe not. Should it be Node? Should it be Erlang? Should it be Elixir? Should it be something else? Don't know. But our default setting is I'm not letting go of it. And that's to our detriment. There is my favorite, the Dunning-Kruger Effect. This was the lemon juice man, famed in the literature. He walks into a bank, sticks it up, broad daylight, no mask, robs the bank. They follow him to his home. The cops confront him. He's like, "How did you find me?" He said, "Dude, we got your picture off the security camera, and then, found you, and here you are." He's like, "You couldn't possibly have seen me. I was wearing the juice." I'm sorry, the what? He says, and I quote, "Everyone knows if you put lemon juice on your face, you're invisible to security cameras." No unit test for that, I'm guessing. No prototyping, no testing there. And what this boils down to is less skilled people at any particular skill will tend to massively overestimate their abilities. The converse is true too. The more expert you are, the more you downgrade your own abilities, and the least you think that something's possible. So you ask two programmers, "Can you do this?" The one who says, "Oh sure, no problem," watch out. The guy who goes, "I just don't know about that. Let's give it a try." Okay, I'd rather listen to him. He's got doubts. Doubts are a good thing. So some simple, critical thinking skills. If you want to test yourself, stop and ask yourself. Everyone says Ruby on Rails is going to die. All right, who's everybody? Why? Who says that? How do they know? How do you know? All this kind of thing. Well, I wish we could do this on our project. All right, what's stopping you? Is it really stopping you? Just some simple questions to ask yourself. And then some sort of unagile warning signs. I don't know if you can read that in the back, but the two dinosaurs going, "Oh crap, is that today?" The arc pulls out. Unagile warning signs. Sloganization. This has already happened to Agile. This probably started 8-9 years ago, happening to Agile, right? And it comes up there with that saying, "We're a customer-focused organization dedicated," the kind of pudding that they spin out for these sorts of things. Same thing now. Oh yes, we refactor mercilessly. We do pair programming every alternate Tuesday for an hour and a half. Whatever. They use the buzzwords and become buzzword compliant without understanding what they mean or actually doing it or any of the rest of that kind of stuff. Demanding conformity, confusing the model with reality, oversimplifying complex situations. Anytime some snake oil salesman or consultant says, "Oh, all you have to do is just do this," you think that's real? You think that tells the truth? Yeah, no. It's rarely that simple. So anytime it says, "Oh, just follow these 12 practices, just follow this book, just follow this process," it doesn't work that way. So how can we get people on board in Agile who aren't? How can we get better at Agile if we're not? How do we get past sort of advanced beginner stage? This is a whole 3-hour talk on itself right here. I won't tedium you with that right now. What time do they kick us out here and bolt the doors and let loose the dogs?
Do we have
No, I'll be done right now. Some places it's like, "Release the hounds," and there we go. So the Dreyfus model is skill acquisition. It goes from novice up to expert, through advanced beginner, competent, and proficient. And a lot of things change as you gain skill on your way up the ladder. You change from being dependent on following context-free rules to being dependent on your intuition, from considering everything to considering just the problem under focus. You see that a lot in code. You tell a beginner doing XP, for instance, say, "Well, test anything that could possibly break." Right? I love that phrase. If you have any experience at all, you know what you're going to do that's likely to break. The novice is like, everything can possibly break. So they're testing accessors, they're testing print statements, they're testing logging. Hell, any of it could break at any time. I have no idea. Interestingly, the novice considers the system over there, and they're a detached observer from it. The expert knows better. They're part of the system. They're more aware of the systems thinking aspect of it. So, a couple interesting lessons from this. Hard and fast rules will reduce the team to a novice level of performance. That's what the Dreyfus research showed. And our good friend Ed Catmull, president of Pixar, said, and I quote, "I don't like hard rules at all. I think they're all bullshit." Straight from Pixar's mouth. I tend to believe him. He seems to know what he's doing. So, you see this sometimes when you've got any environment that institutes very rigid, draconian rules. What happens is you're dragging the whole team down to the level of the novice. You're not allowing the expert or any of the higher skill levels to actually use their expertise, which is paying. So, what does all this mean? Well, what we want to try and do is start off with the general notion of like an Agile mindset. The idea of what we want to try to do. We want a lot of feedback. We want to make constant tiny adjustments. You don't want to like crank the wheel all the way to the left and overcorrect and crash into trees. You want to make lots of small adjustments in a highly collaborative environment, right? You don't say, okay, well, we just made this 200-point list and now we're going to follow it till the end of time or we all die. No, you talk. It's a back and forth. It's a conversation. It's a collaboration. You use information radiators. You use wikis. You do whatever. Get everyone locked in the same room together with a beer tap. Whatever works. But to do that, you've got to have some background in place first. You have to make sure that all of your development and management practices generate continuous, meaningful feedback. Now, there are some systems out there that will purport to help you and measure how much time you spend in your code editor, how much time you spend in the bathroom. And management loves these kinds of things because, again, need for closure. I got a stream of numbers coming in. This is like dopamine cast to integers. It's just, right? Love it. But it's not helpful, of course. You only get what you measure, right? And that tends not to go well. So we need meaningful, continuous feedback. We need the ability to actually evaluate it in context. So whatever comes back, it's like, all right, well, you can't just look at it as raw data. You've got to look at it in light of when did this happen, where did this happen, with whom, under what circumstances. And you have to have the ability to change anything that needs changing as a result of that. You've got to have that wide open flexibility. Otherwise, you're just beating your head against the wall. You can have retrospective after retrospective where, Fred's not pulling his weight and the user's a loser. How I like that one. Whatever it might be. You got to have the ability to do something about that. Then you can actually look at the Agile Manifesto. People, individual interactions, working software, customer collaboration, responding to change. And it's funny, something as simple as this has gotten misunderstood over the last 10, 12 years, right? I had a lengthy conversation with someone here in the Triangle the other day for a large company that should remain nameless, who said, well, clearly the Agile Manifesto says that we can't write documentation. So I missed something. And I was there, I was napping. Could you show me where that came from? And again, they're like, well, yeah, it says, don't do documentation. It's like, no, it doesn't. And so once again, I have the explanation. If you need documentation of any sort for regulatory purposes, for the EPA, for the DEA, for whoever, yes, you have to do that. It's a requirement. If it's a requirement, it's a requirement. Do it. Right? That's not so hard. And if it's not, all of our projects have always done detailed design documents. What do you do with them? We print them. And then what do you do with them? They go in binders. Dynamite. Then what? Well, we age them. open tasks for 10 years, and then we mulch them. Okay, yeah. That's what we want to avoid, right? If there's a purpose for it, yes, of course, do it. If there's no good reason for it, why are you wasting your time on it? And at the end of the day, what this question is asking is, if you ask the user, would you rather have the manual for this product, or would you rather have the product? Right? And just to put another nail in that coffin, how many apps on your phone come with manuals? Just ask. So you've got all this stuff cooking along. You've got the must list of the environment. You've got the agile definition. You've got the values to try to adhere to. And if you can hold all that in your head and actually do it, then you're approaching agility, sort of. Almost. It's one important thing we're missing. I don't actually know why that slide's there. It's just another nice quote from Ed saying, if everyone is trying to prevent error, it screws things up. Oh, that's why. That's a great quote. You don't really want to try to prevent error. Mistakes are good things. We like them. I'll tell you why in just a second. So, was that it? Was that the end of Agile? We had some feedback, we got some loosey-goosey stuff, we want to try and defer decisions. Was that all there was to it? Well, here's the big thing that we missed. When I look back through my notes, some interviewer or somebody asked the question of all or most of us at the time and said, 10, 20 years from now, what do you foresee? What do you forecast having come out of this turning point, this event, this what happened? And the popular sentiment was, well, having kind of laid out these ground rules and having had XP and Scrum, Alistair's crystal methods, gym stuff, all these kinds of things, we thought what was going to happen was you would see an explosion of Agile-ish methods. That every consultant and his dog would be out there saying, okay, well, here's Fred's method, here's Bob's method, whatever. You have this explosion of similar-ish but different Agile methods that all kind of adhere to the manifesto, but all unique in their own little quirky and pleasant ways. And you have this rich field of processes to choose from. Didn't happen. Totally did not happen. Do you know why it didn't happen? Look, here's a book. There's 13, go back to 12 practices. I can just do these and I are Agile. Here's another book. It's only got 3 practices. I can do that. I'm Agile. And that was kind of the end of it. It's like, well, there's the 12. We can only do 2.5 of them here, so we're going to do those and call it Agile. And that was the end of it. What we really missed was the idea from improv theater. So I'm reading this book, Tina Fey, talking about improv and how you do it. And she said the way this works, you could plan up ahead. You can have a script for a play, planned up ahead, and everyone does their part and done cool. Or you do improv. You get up on stage with some folks. None of you have done this before. You have no idea. There is no script. You're on your own. Does that sound familiar? Right? That is mostly our world as software developers. We're out on stage, and there ain't no script. So, what do these folks do in theater to make it engaging? Well, they have 2 rules. Someone starts, you answer them, somebody else chimes in, and you try to build a plot, an environment, a play out of nothing. And to keep it going, you have to abide by these 2 rules. You must always agree, and you must always add. So, what that means is, you're up here, first person says, well, here we are on the moon. Now you could say, yep. Then you're dead, right? That's the end of the conversation. Or worse, you could say, no, we're not on the moon. This is more like that one. Neither of these is particularly helpful, right? You have to say, yes, whatever your speech is, yes, I agree we're on the moon, and look, I just saw something move behind that boulder. Okay, cool. You agreed with the premise so far, and you've moved the plot along. You have added something to move the plot along. The next person does the same thing. I think you're right. And then they add their own little bit. I thought I saw something over there when we first got here. Whatever. And you agree and you add. They call this the yes and method. And that's how they get through this style of improv. And this is what we missed. Lots of folks agreed, kind of, grudgingly maybe, and they didn't add. They didn't add their thing. One reason I think that is why is because of this fear of errors, fear of failing. The actual cycle that you want to engage in is to try, fail, learn, and repeat. That's the creative process you want to get into doing. If you don't fail a dozen times a day at something pretty heinous, you're probably not trying hard enough, or you're not reaching enough, right? We have a real stigmatism against failure in our culture. We have a real stigmatism about not knowing. You know, at your place of employ, is it okay for you to answer and say, I don't know? I fervently hope so. I mean, I'm going to have a tattoo across here, because I'm always answering, I don't know. You know, it's really interesting in the publishing side of the world now. We get these proposals in, these ideas. Hey, you need a book on blip, blip, blip. And I swear to you, as I stand here, I've never even heard it, right? It's like, really? This is a thing? Now, there was a thing about underwater basket weaving, which kind of surprised me. That is a thing. I'm not making it up. There's a course on Coursera for underwater basket weaving. So you have to be able to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. I actually looked up underwater basket weaving. There's all kinds of stuff about it. There's a whole like religion, and there's the underwater basket weaving god, and they do the stuff. There's saltwater versus fresh, and there's all this stuff. It's a thing. But it has to be okay for you to say, I have no idea. Should we use this technology or that? I don't know. How are we going to figure it out? Well, let's try this. Let's do this, and let's do that. We can ask over here. We can try these experiments. We can do these things. Here's how we'll find out. And it's the same with your process. Is this going to work for us? I don't know. But let's try this. Let's try that. Let's tune it as we go. Let's try it. Expect to fail. If we didn't fail, then we didn't try anything nearly good. Fail, learn from it. That's why no one does it that way. Okay. And repeat as necessary. So, this is lovely. Great idea. Where are we supposed to come up with all these ideas? Where are we supposed to generate this wanton creativity that you espouse here? Well, these next couple slides I did for a TEDx here in Raleigh a couple of years back now. 4 or 5 years ago, maybe? 3 years ago? Which takes some of the ideas from the Thinking and Learning book about where the next great idea might come from. And so the first point is, well, it's going to come from you. It's going to come from your brain. But not your whole brain. It's actually coming from a particular part of your brain where you get these sort of pre-conscious ideas and thoughts bubbling around that you might not be readily aware of. Because they're sort of pre-conscious thoughts, they're kind of asynchronous. You can't just say, hey, I need a thought about this, and it pops up. It's more like if I asked you, what group did this song "Love Is Like Oxygen"? If you know it at all, it'll come to you in a day or two. You know, you'll be in the shower or going in the yard or something. Oh, yeah, it was so and so. Right? It's asynchronous. It's not on demand. The thoughts are kind of fragile. Right? You first wake up in the morning, you have this vivid dream, you remember it like you were there. What happens is you start to describe it to someone. It evaporates. There's different parts of the brain responsible for verbalizing it versus generating the imagery, and they have some sort of bus contention, if you will, going on. So as you try to describe it, you lose access to the memory itself. These thoughts are fairly fragile, they're fairly slippery. Who has them? Yeah, everyone has great ideas, even you. Everyone on the whole planet has great ideas. The problem is very few bother to keep track of it. You know, you dream something, you think of it on the car ride home, you're like, oh, I'll remember that. No, not going to happen. You're not going to remember it. It's like a stream. You know, it keeps going, something else is taking its place. So most great ideas just get lost. They're just gone. So what you need to do to stay ahead of the competition is to capture it, right? And you think of these thoughts like birds, right? They're just fluttering around. You want to try and capture them. How do you do that? You do not do it in front of the computer. As it turns out, one of the worst places to try to be creative or inventive is sitting there typing on an ASCII keyboard. That's actually the worst thing for you because apparently the way your brain is structured, when you're dealing with that kind of symbolic representation of letters and numerals and curly braces, if you're so inclined, on the computer, that's actually like blocking out the sort of preconscious ideas and the idea-generating portions of the brain that we want access to. It's blocking them out. This is yet another reason why pair programming is actually interesting from a cognitive point of view. When you've got the navigator and the driver, they're actually using different parts of their brains. The driver is there stuck in this sort of symbolic processing mode, desperately looking for that closing paren if it's Lisp, or that closing curly brace if it's C, or progeny. And the navigator isn't locked in like that. So they're free to see things, to see relationships that you're physically not able to grok because you're sitting there typing characters. So, and you might have seen this, how many times has it happened to you where you're sitting there stuck on a bug, stuck on a design problem of some sort, and it's just killing you, you're not getting it, you get up, you go walk away from the keyboard, you're halfway down the hall, maybe you're down to the front door, bang, right, it comes to you. Right? That never happens. It happens all the time. Same thing. Once you leave that processing mode and you're doing something mindless, which for most of us is walking, chewing gum might interfere a little bit, but it's fairly mindless. Bang! It frees up these ideas. So you need to be able to capture these asynchronous ideas when you're away from the keyboard. Any idea, any insight, any question? I wonder why. Whatever. And you need something with you all the time to capture it on. It could be a notebook, index cards, your iThingy, your cell phone. You're driving down the highway, stuck in traffic, you call your office on leave yourself a voicemail with the idea, get back home, it's transcribed for you as email, you can copy and paste it and stick it somewhere, whatever it takes. But have something with you all the time so when you're not at the computer and one of these random ideas just floats by, you can capture it. So what do you do with all these captured things that you've collected? Well, you want to stick them in a mind map. Something like this. See what I did there? And this is actually interesting. Once you start collecting some kind of an idea or set of ideas into a particular place, there's a phenomenon akin to sense tuning where you'll see more of it. It's almost as if you told your brain, hey, I need more ideas related to monads, whatever, something I'm researching. I want more ideas related to this. And your brain's like, oh, you want that kind of stuff. Okay, boop. And now it sets its filters to try to find that. It's like if I said, look at the color red in this room. All of a sudden you see his shirt, the drapes, the tabletop, the shirt there, the can. All of a sudden the W magazine holder, red pops out at you all over because now you're attuned to it. Same thing here. Once you start collecting ideas of a particular class and you make a class for them, here are my ideas on functional programming. Here's my ideas on event-driven programming. Here's my ideas on whatever. Just by having categories, your brain's like, I can look for that kind of stuff for you. And it starts spitting it out at you. You want to use a mind map to kind of work with this stuff once you've collected it because it is a good format to help you nurture exploratory ideas. You don't want to do it like an outline. You don't want to kind of start at the top and go around the counter, go around clockwise. That's just an outline in a circle. That starts to impose constraints on your thinking process. And these are fragile enough thoughts that kind of structure can kill it. So you want something free like this, you want to actually hand draw it on a cruddy piece of paper, right? Don't do it on all those fancy candy mind map tools, right? Just a big piece of paper on your desk, eat lunch over it, spill stuff on it, leave it out, have scribbles, have erasures. It's a very loose thing. But once you start seeing stuff, you begin to capture different associations and see new relationships you might not have noticed before. Oh, this principle over here, Scheme does this, and wow, I just saw the same thing in this Ruby library, this gem over here. We're doing a similar technique. Oh, look at this. Oh, boom. And you start seeing stuff. So, with that, I'll finish up with the quote that tells you the real voyage of discovery isn't seeking new landscapes, but just in having new eyes. Just looking at it slightly different way. And with that, I will give you my Twitter handle, my email address, and thank you so much for having me.